It's time for another Business Analysis Live. My name is Susan Moore. I'm the Community Engagement Manager at IIBA.
And my name is Scott Bennett. I'm the Manager of Business Analysis here at the International Institute of Business Analysis. Thank you for joining us today. We've got an exciting topic lined up for you. Our topic today is requirements engineering and business analysis. Susan, you and I had a conversation before we got started here about your experience with the term requirements engineering. Why don't you tell the audience about that?
Yeah, it was something that I discovered a while ago when I used to work in banking and finance. And we were building systems from the ground up, and requirement management was really important because we were never going to get another opportunity to build that system from the ground up. And so through my research, I discovered IREB, which is the Requirements Engineering Board, the International Requirements Engineering Board. And I got really interested in what they were doing with more detailed requirements and requirements management. And so I was really excited when we decided to talk about this topic today because it's a little something that I bring with me from that more technical past of mine.
Absolutely. So we do have a guest with us today from IREB. Let us introduce you to Stan. Welcome, Stan. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Scott, for letting me join the session today. So I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for that.
Yeah, no problem. So for our viewers, we are live. So if we make a mistake, you're going to see it, but it gives you the opportunity to ask questions. So please put your questions in the question box, and we're here to answer those today with Stan. So Stan, why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about your background and about IREB?
Yeah, sure. So currently I'm working for IREB as the managing director, and I've joined IREB 4 years ago. And IREB, in general, as Susan already mentioned, is the International Requirements Engineering Board. And the idea of IREB was somewhere born in 2006, when several people from research, from the university, but also from industry came together and thought about, hey, we need to skill up the people outside in the software industry somehow to know more about requirements engineering, because we need to set up solutions that have a high quality. And quality not only begins with testing, but it starts directly when talking about requirements, when talking to users about their skills. And that's where the IREB was born. IREB is a non-profit organization. We are sitting in Germany in Karlsruhe, and we are focusing really on the discipline of requirements engineering and to create a broader knowledge on this topic, just to make solutions somehow better and more qualitative for the outside. So that's a brilliant idea.
That's great. And how long has IREB been around? When was it first founded?
It was founded in 2006, the International Requirements Engineering Board. And so it's already around since several years, really. Yeah. So it means during this time, we have established the CPRE, Certified Professional for Requirements Engineering. That's probably, Susan, what you have looked for when searching about requirements engineering. And so this is the major product in our organization.
Great. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the term requirements engineering, we have a definition here. I'll put it up. There's a lot of words here. Stan, why don't you tell us what you define as requirements engineering?
So for me, requirements engineering is really about eliciting requirements. This means understanding user needs on the one hand, getting out of the users and stakeholders, what are their needs and what do they really need that needs to be solved by software, and documenting these requirements in a proper way that on the one hand, the stakeholders, mostly business areas or business organizations, that they understand and that we can create a kind of shared understanding with them, but also on the other hand, that we have a kind of input for developers and our architects and developers, that they are able to shape the best solution out of it and to implement a software that is really needed without finding some miracles in the very end. And what comes on top of this, for sure, if we talk about requirements, I mean, we all know that requirements are changing continuously because business is changing, people forget something, there is another competitor coming up with several new features and so on. This means we also need to talk about managing of requirements and talking about change management and how to handle requirements, looking for the impact that is really done on the requirements. And this is requirements engineering in my perspective.
What I've always been curious about is why requirements engineering. We kind of laughed. Why not requirements corralling or requirements something else? Why do you use the term engineering?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So engineering is more or less coming from the idea of software engineering because when looking at software, it's mostly an engineering discipline. And when talking about requirements, we also thought about that this is a kind of engineering because you need to be precise when documenting requirements. We need to, as mentioned, we need to create a kind of specification that lead for architects and developers later on having something that they can really work with and that they can develop the right and fitting solution for their customers and stakeholders. That's where the idea of engineering came from.
Okay, great. And just a reminder for those of you watching live, please put your questions in. We will get to them shortly. It's an opportunity for you to get your questions answered. Stan, we were talking a little bit earlier about the industries where requirements engineering are used. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, in theory, in general, requirements engineering can and should be used everywhere. But for sure, I mean, requirements engineering plays a major role in all these areas where you have an impact on people or on human beings. So, for instance, in automotive industry, in the aviation, in medical domains, and so on. So let's look, for instance, in the automotive industry, where we also have a major or major customers that they need requirements engineering because the automotive industry, especially today with autonomous driving and so on, you need to define your requirements properly. So and there most often they are not only textual based, they are using models, they simulate models, and this is something where you need to be somehow precise, and you also need to know when you are doing a change because you need to adapt certain things within your system. Then you need to know what is the impact. So this means here really comes also a kind of traceability into place, that you are quite sure if you change a certain requirement or if you change some measures on a requirement, that you also know what is the impact outside at the end, what is the impact to the user, to the driver, to a human being.
Okay, so it sounds like precision, accuracy, that's really what this is about, is making sure that you've got that accuracy to make sure you're doing things that could potentially have some negative impacts if you don't get them right.
Absolutely. And this could be mankind, but this also could be financial stuff and all those things. So if looking to the financial domain, I think also here there are a lot of regulations that need to be considered when talking about or when developing systems. And also here, requirements engineering needs to look on not only on stakeholders as human beings, but also on stakeholders like regulations, laws, and so on that need to be considered when defining the requirements for a system, and at least making stakeholders somehow aware of this kind of regulations if there are some conflicts with requirements from a human being, with, for instance, requirements that are coming from a regulation.
Okay.
As you're talking, I'm thinking about, my first exposure to requirements engineering was because I was in a financial and thus a regulated environment. So ensuring that we were passing transactions correctly between customers and banking institutions was important. But I'm also hearing, I think, that there's also almost like a concern with ethics and humanity and the people side of this. So while I typically think of these as system changes, it sounds like requirements engineering also factors in, well, there are humans that could be harmed or helped through requirements as well. Is that kind of an element of requirements engineering?
Absolutely. So in my perspective, when I work as a requirements engineer, I don't have any, let's say, issues with killing people with when defining wrong requirements. That was a good thing. So I was working in telecommunications domain, and what could happen is for sure that the bill was not correct, that some features are not available anyhow. But most often, or at the end, we are working with people, and we are working with human beings. And if you develop software for such people, it doesn't matter if it's a sales system, if this is a customer care agent, or whomever, they also have fears. They also need to go this change transition. I mean, you know this from business analysts, because you are the step before that. You need to make people aware of when change happens, that change is not always bad, that change can also give some new opportunities and so on. And this is the same when developing software. If people are used to their system, doesn't matter how bad the system is at the moment, if there is something new, they have some fears, they have some troubles in making things differently, because there's always a kind of change that will happen when we introduce a kind of new software. And this needs to be covered right in the beginning, in my point of view, because otherwise, when you just ignore such topics, then this software will somehow not be used at the end.
Okay. So it sounds like requirements engineering probably doing a lot of thought up front, a lot of requirements up front. Do you encounter projects that are in an agile setting?
Absolutely, absolutely. So, funny thing here, when I've worked in as a consultant in industry, in the very beginning, when the organizations were trying to move from a plan-based approach to an agile approach, so they just thought, hey, we don't need this requirements engineering stuff or testing stuff and whatever anymore. Just put a bunch of people in a room, and they know what to do, and then everything will work out properly and fine. But big surprise, that does not happen. And here, hardly most companies, I think, they learned step by step that still the skills are needed, still skills for requirements engineering, for business analysis, but also for testing and so on. They are still needed. Maybe in another way, maybe in a kind of other frequency, maybe in another weight, because at the end, what we are doing as requirements engineer, requirements are, we have to consider a kind of value orientation. So what we're doing with requirements, we document certain things. We want to create a kind of awareness, common and shared understanding to reduce risk. And this is exactly what should be done in agile environment too, because you have several user stories, for instance, that need to be discussed. You need to create a shared understanding. And here as well, you need a kind of at least tiny documentation if the development is really done in-house. Most often, development is not even done in-house, and this means the more documentation you need, because this is a kind of contract with some vendors, that they are knowing what needs to be developed, and that you have some kind of checklist and checkpoint to make your tests afterwards against. And this is really something, in my point of view, that is really also required in agile approaches.
Yeah, as we're talking about this, I mean, we're talking about how requirements or the outputs, the results of those, what I'm building as a result of those requirements are impacting humans. But then there's also the artifacts themselves that we are building are being shared with other humans who may not be in the same location that you are. And more, we are a world of, I might have developers in one part of the world and testers in another part of the world and customers in yet another part of the world. And I know that many of our agile frameworks suggest we'll get everybody into a room moment. It's just not possible. And
Exactly.
sometimes I think that when organizations introduce Agile into their working environments, they don't often consider where the people are. How can I make sure that everybody has what they need in order to do their work?
Yeah.
So, yeah, so requirements engineering, I think, is particularly for systems development is a very necessary part of in reducing risk and providing people with what they need. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And this does not mean, from my point of view, that agile approaches are not really meaningful. They are, yeah, completely, because you can concentrate maybe first on things that create value, that you don't develop the whole bunch, that you don't have to define the whole bunch of requirements or the whole system at once. So you can focus on certain things that creates value for the business, and then you define step by step. And I mean, the efforts then somehow a bit more linear than that you have a big upfront effort, but at the end, this job needs to be done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. All right. So, what do you think our audience wants to know today about requirements engineering? Let's see. So if you have, so for those of you that are listening to us today, have you heard of requirements engineering? What do you know about requirements engineering?
Yeah, would be
We've
interesting.
got questions for you. Now, do you have questions for us? That's the question.
I did see a comment here from Taya, I believe it's pronounced. Good to see you here, Stan.
Actually, yeah. Long time ago, we had a chat.
Ah,
Yeah.
Um, it's interesting. I have seen a couple of IIBA chapters, and some folks that we know of, that we've also had here, as guests, doing some things with IREB recently. So there's a lot of synergies between the requirements engineering and business analysis communities. So, for example, I think that you guys are part of, maybe there's a lot of things going on in Poland these days. So I noticed that I see lots of
Yeah.
speakers from Poland. So tell us a little bit about, requirements engineering. I will say that it seems to me that it has been more focused in Europe. Why Europe? Is it just because that's where you're located?
Um, Probably yes. I mean, for sure, we are located in Europe, and our let's say most impactful market is Europe. But on the other hand, if you look on the countries we are serving for or with IREB, and especially with the CPRA, we are currently in 96 countries worldwide, with about 70,000 certified people out there. And so it's not only Europe, but for sure, if you look at the figures, and they are also freely transparent on our website, you can look at the statistics. Then you see that for sure the European market is the most with the most impact. We also were wondering why, for instance, in the US or in Canada, that there's not this part of how to deal with requirements engineering. Not sure if this is just because we are too far away. On the other hand, if you look on our website, there's a lot of traffic really coming from the US and from Canada, and I think people are interested in this area, and they are also downloading our handbooks or syllabi. So this means there is a kind of interest. Maybe they are not that interested in our certifications, but as mentioned in the very beginning, as we are a non-profit organization, we are focusing on just spreading around the world the idea of requirements engineering, and just to create a kind of awareness that requirements engineering is necessary. And if this is the way it goes, it's also fine for us.
Yeah, I know that I have been, I have gotten the IREB magazine for, seems like for years.
Mm.
And I've enjoyed it. And it is, I mean, it is a detailed exploration of each of the topics, but I think that's what makes it really great. So if you geek out a little bit about requirements management, and that is clearly me, because I do love, I've built a couple of requirement management tools. I love all that stuff. So the IREB magazine is good stuff. Lots of great topics, and as we're talking here today, there's there's just this is really, requirements engineering is really a very specialized skill set within the broader business analysis body of knowledge,
Yeah,
is
yeah,
what I'm
absolutely.
learning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And during my work as a consultant in requirements engineering, I also often have worked with business analysts because, I mean, look at, for instance, the automotive industry. If you have some, let's say, new strategy for your entire business and how you want to sell your products, your cars, for instance, with real agencies, or that anyone could sell this product, this is really something where you need someone who has some strategic analysis skills, who's going into the details, talking to business, looking at existing processes, how they could be defined, or how are they working, and look what could be done a bit better, and in this kind of way. And on the other hand, if at a certain point in time such people want to support the business, for instance, a sales consultant, or someone who's working at the for cars, and here we really need kind of skills in the part of how to define systems, because if it comes to the place that you want to support certain business processes by IT, I think here really the interplay of business analysis and a requirements engineer comes into action. What I have done quite often when in the telecommunications industry, for instance, when a new sales process was designed by a business analyst, and I was talking to the business analyst, hey, what do you think needs to be done at this and this and this step? How can this be supported by a new piece of software, and so on? And I think here we have quite nice synergies in on the one hand in our skill sets, because we are doing similar things, maybe with another focus, but we need to work hand in hand, and we need to work together at the end to come up with the best digital solution at the end.
Yeah, I'm hearing that I might consider requirements engineering if I am. So there's a title here, at least in the US, business systems analyst, and so they know the system or systems in their area, and so if you are somebody that is a more technical business analyst, a business systems analyst or something, it sounds like this requirements engineering skill set could really be a way that you could enhance the work that you're doing. It really builds on to what you are doing with your business analysis skills.
So, Susan, we are live, and it seems like our question feed stopped about 15 minutes ago.
Oh my gosh, is that why I'm not seeing anything? Well,
We've got comments up to 5 minutes after we started.
oh
So I'm
my
just going to mute
gosh.
myself and see if I can see any questions on the live on my phone here.
Let's see. Well, here, I'm gonna I'm gonna get my iPad out.
Okay.
This is the fun. I was wondering what the heck is going on with our comments today. So Stan, I don't know if you've used StreamYard, but this seems like some of the fun things that happens in StreamYard every once in a while. They just stop. They just stop sharing comments. Let's
They have to look
see.
on their requirements, probably.
I know we need to. LinkedIn, you need a requirements engineer. Oh my goodness.
But
Let's
I've got one
see.
here. Is
Okay.
there a difference between user requirements and system requirements?
Well, for me, it's on another level. For user requirements, we talk about what is really desired by a user, for a user interface functionality that is required by a user. And so if you talk, for instance, let's use Netflix, for instance, as a system. Then you have a user who is searching for movies, who's adding something to a playlist, who wants to pay something. These are all user requirements. System requirements are on another level, a more detailed level. So system requirements here are more on whatever how the connection is established. What is really the scalability of systems? How can I take a kind of resilience with my systems? How can I, what kind of data needs to be stored from a user to create this kind of watch list that the user wants? So this means you're going to break down the user requirements into more details to see what is then really needed by the system or by system components to implement this user requirement.
Okay. And we had talked earlier about functional requirements versus non-functional requirements. And you described it in a way that I have never heard before. So when I talk about non-functional requirements, I typically have a checklist that I go through. Can you describe for our users what you look at from a requirements engineering perspective for those non-functional?
So when we look at requirements, we differentiate three different categories. One thing is functional requirements. I think this is pretty clear. It's about functionality that is provided by the system. On the other hand, non-functional requirements we don't mention. We say this is a kind of quality requirements, because non-functional requirements can be, in our point of view, quality requirements and constraints. A quality requirement in our definition is something that is really shifting or lifting the quality of the system. Could be performance, availability, security, reliability, whatever. Everything that is related to a quality of the system. If you look to the ISO 2510, then you have also a set of quality criteria that is for a system or for a system in use. And this is when we talk about quality requirements. In addition, we have constraints. And constraints are requirements that somehow limit the solution space. So for instance, that we need to consider that anytime a certain hardware or a certain operation system needs to be used, or a certain framework needs to be used for the development. These are a kind of constraints, and they are necessary that they are met by the given functional and quality requirements. So this is the differentiation. I think especially for quality requirements, this is quite nice, because they are existing frameworks that are also standardized.
Okay, great. So before we started this session, we had a record number of people register for this. I'm wondering, Susan, have we broken LinkedIn?
Yes, that's in fact what happened. Good job, Stan. Requirements engineering has broken
Perfect.
the internet today.
So LinkedIn has to look on the scalability of their systems.
Or it could be a StreamYard issue. But so there are a couple of questions. For whatever reason, I'm not able to get all the way back in our comments. But so a couple of questions that we have, and it's funny because as we talk about requirements engineering, I hear so clearly some of the issues that I have experienced as a business analyst. So again, there's a lot of overlap here in the skill sets, and therefore I think there's a lot of overlap in our experiences, whether it's on the business or technical side. But we had one question around, you know, stakeholders don't always speak up when you are eliciting requirements. Typically, they've got something to say when you've reached the end and you're in testing. So, what are some of the ways that requirements engineering might help in that scenario where you've got people wanting to give feedback at the end?
I mean, this is one of the most tricky tasks in requirements engineering, being honest, to get really first to identify the right stakeholders, and second to let them speak out. And in requirements engineering, we have different techniques for eliciting requirements. So there are several ones for, like, brainstorming. It could be kind of interview that is done. This could also be some kind of crowd analysis that will be done. And it anytime somehow depends on what kind of requirements are you eliciting. So we also use the Kano model when talking about requirements, to see what are really requirements that are some kind of delighters, dissatisfiers, and so on. And based on the type or the classification from the Kano model, what kind of requirements we are talking about, then we also use different kinds of techniques for eliciting requirements. So for instance, if we want to search for requirements that the people are mostly not talking about, for instance, because it's just their daily work, it's in their blood. So then we need to kind of observation techniques and so on to just see what the user is doing and to come to these requirements.
Right. Okay. Great. Susan, any more questions that have popped up through the devices that we're trying to get questions on? Oh, you're on mute.
Susan has.
Yes. Well, because I'm trying to manage all of these different devices here. So let's see. So non-functional is related to scheduling, time related that does not impact the functionality of a system. Let me see. Oh no, I think this was just a comment. So where do you gather functional requirements from? How do you make sure that you gather all of the necessary non-functional requirements?
Non-functional or functional?
I think this one is not. So there was a lot of questions around non-functional requirements. Yeah. So what? So maybe just, I know we talked about quality requirements, which, by the way, I think is frankly, it's kind of an easier way to understand what non-functional is. What are the ways that you collect those with requirements engineering?
So for quality requirements, I will come back to the term quality requirements, because when we are talking about quality requirements, I think a good idea is having kind of checklists. And this could be the quality model of ISO, because they provide several categories, and within these categories they have different aspects that are considered by this quality. And here, at least as a requirements engineer, you have something at hand to talk to the people and ask them, hey, do we need to something for interoperability? Does the system has to run on, let's say, different platforms? Or what about scalability? What about the performance of the system? What is, for instance, the time that a certain functionality has to respond to the user? And this is for each and every requirement. You can ask these questions if there is some quality behind. And here, this is a kind of, let's say, for me, it's more a kind of checklist, and I'm using this quality model and just going through your functional requirements and to check if there is some kind of quality aspects that are needed. Could be reliability, could be response time, could be whatever.
Okay. And Stan, you had mentioned before we started this broadcast today that there's a glossary that you've got on your website. What we'll do is when we publish this on YouTube and other resources, we'll put a link to that glossary so people can look in there and understand some of the terminology that we're talking about today.
Yeah.
So another question we have is, what is the impact of AI, do you think, on the requirements engineering practice?
Well, this could be answered in two ways, because we differentiate on the one hand AI for requirements engineering. This means how can artificial intelligence somehow support the requirements engineer in his process? And on the other hand, what needs to be done for or during requirements engineering when designing systems with artificial intelligence? Maybe coming back to the first part, I think this was also meant. So supporting requirements engineering with AI. I think in the future, AI could support us in defining requirements in a proper form. So in our syllabi, for instance, we introduce set templates, or phrase templates, just to have a clear structure of requirements, because a requirements document is not a novel and needs to be not, let's say, anytime each requirement should be in a different way formulated. It should be formulated in the same way. And this is quite clear and understandable. And this is something that could easily be checked also afterwards by kind of artificial intelligence. there's also maybe some kind of prompt engineering in the future for introducing and letting the artificial intelligence be a kind of persona. It's maybe people that are not really accessible and just chatting with the artificial intelligence for certain topics. And I mean, what needs to be considered that this is still a kind of artificial intelligence, and that the requirements engineer talking with this tool needs to differentiate what is true and what is false. So it's not everything is a given. And I think this is also a nice and critical job in the future for requirements engineers to see what is really the truth. And this needs to be validated, in my point of view, with real users anyhow.
Right. Yeah, we had covered that off on a couple of different discussions that we've had around how AI can really help generate some content.
Yeah.
But what you're talking about there is that you need to validate it. You need to make sure it's true, because
Exactly.
unfortunately, AI tools present information very confidently.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can misinterpret that as truth,
Yeah.
whereas it does need to get double checked. I agree.
Yeah, at some point I'll have to tell you about the uh, contempt hearing that I am following of an attorney who wrote a brief completely from Chat GPT, including cites to cases which did not exist. And when the judge discovered this, he brought him into court and made him explain why he used this brief without checking any of this information, and he was being held on
Yeah.
potential contempt charges. So critical thinking is a really important part of the work that we do whenever we are understanding information.
Yeah.
So here's another question. We talked a little bit about Agile, but this question was, how does requirements engineering align with the Agile mindset? So less about the Agile frameworks, more about just the capabilities and skills around lowercase a Agile.
In my point of view, many principles in Agile match with principles, and also we have created in our syllabus a kind of principles for requirements engineering. They match very well, because at the end, when we talk about that common understanding before documentation, yes, it's true. I mean, at the end, we need to create a shared understanding also in requirements engineering. And the way to document requirements doesn't matter as a kind of temporary document or as a document that will be used for the implementation, is a vehicle to create a kind of shared understanding. And this is also true when we talk about the truth is somehow in the implementation. That's true, but at the other hand, we first need to identify what is really needed. And I think when looking at the Agile principles, they are, in my point of view, perfectly mostly fit with the principles in requirements engineering as well.
Yeah, very good. So Susan, we're getting close on time here. Is there another question you want to pop up before we close?
We're getting a couple of questions around if there are tools specific to requirements engineering. So are there tools that requirements engineers might need to be aware of?
Well, there are plenty of tools outside for requirements engineering. So there's these big ones like DOORS from IBM. There's this smaller one like Catalyst, and maybe today there are also many web-based tools that could be used quite easily without installing a bunch of software in your companies. If you want to look out, may I afterwards can give you a link to a website. There's someone who's not from IREB, but there's another website I have cited in our handbook for requirements management. That's why I know it's some time ago. But this will provide a nice overview of tools and tool categories for requirements engineering. So maybe you can access to the as LinkedIn comment or whatever.
Perfect. Yes, we'll certainly put that in the YouTube description for people to utilize.
Yeah, and if we haven't shared it in our comments, we've also got a link to the IREB website, which has a lot of information, including a way to sign up for your magazine, which is, I think, is a great read if you are a business systems analyst or do more technical work with systems. So I think that's been good. Well, I'm a little disappointed that that our comments didn't function well today, but I think we handled it. We want to thank everybody for your questions, and if you've got questions and we didn't answer them, well, we might just have to have Stan come back.
Absolutely.
We're always happy to have guests. Um, so thank you again, Stan, for sharing more about requirements engineering today, and it's been great to have you. And well, let's talk about what's going to happen in just 2 weeks from today, and that is we're going to talk about strategy analysis, and we have got Laura Patton, who talks about what is strategy analysis in some other forums, and you've seen her here just a couple of months ago. So that will be 2 weeks from today, July 19th at 10:30 a.m. Eastern. Thanks so much for joining us today.
If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and we'll leave another one right here for you to help you in your business analysis career. If you haven't subscribed to the IIBA YouTube channel yet, you can click over here and click on the bell icon to get notified every time we publish a brand new video.